So, hello everyone, welcome to our Halloween Fantasy Fellowship Author Q&A. My name is Chris, and with me today is Sally. Joining us today for this Q&A is the wonderful Rosie Talbot. Rosie released her debut novel, 16 Souls, earlier this month. Since release, 16 Souls has surged to quickly become a bestseller. Both Sally and I absolutely devoured the book on the week of release, and we both agree and can confirm that Rosie definitely has a bright future in writing, and we can't wait to get to know her a little bit better. So we're going to dive straight into the questions. Sally?
Okay, so my first question is, why the number 16? So does it have special significance to you, or to the magic of your world, or is it just a number you picked at random? I just really like to know why that number.
I would love to say, oh yes, it has like really powerful magical significance, which I'm sure it does. I haven't actually looked up what the magical number 16 means. But it just, before I wrote the book, the title just came into my brain, and it was always 16 souls, and I was like, who are these 16 souls? I must find out. And it just kind of stuck. And I suppose it could have been 15 souls, but it sounds better with 16 because of the S and the S. So I'm very sorry, it's not like a deep magical reason. I just thought it sounded really cool.
I mean, it does.
There's a really nice quote in the book that made me stop and like think for a while, which is quite unusual when I'm reading. There's as much magic in the world as you let in. Is that something you produced, or is that something you've borrowed from somewhere else? Or have you been inspired by someone else?
Not any specific inspiration. It just felt like something that character would say at that time, in the way that he says it, which is kind of like he's trying to come off with something that sounds really deep, kind of as a bit of a joke, but actually is quite deep for that moment, and it's quite true for the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and it's true in life as well, isn't it? That's the thing. Like, it's a really beautiful line, and it really caught me off guard. Like, I was just kind of like rattling along, going through the motions, reading, and I was just like, oh my god, like that's it's a really, really good piece of writing. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think, particularly with magic, some of us, I think we let a lot of magic into the world. We surround ourselves with stories that are full of magic. We see a lot of magic in ordinary things. If it was inspired by anything, and this is going to sound really, really weird, there's a poet called Gerard Manley Hopkins that I was forced to study his work at school, and he was a Catholic priest who wrote a lot of nature poetry, and then he would sort of squeeze in religious stuff right at the end and be like, and all of this is lovely because of God. And he was kind of criticized a lot whether that was quite jarring. But one thing that he has is this concept of inscape, where he would look at nature and he would see flashes of what he thought of as like fire. And you can see that in his poetry, like as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. And he's seeing this magical spark of God's life in things that all of the rest of us are just walking around going, oh, that's a nice bird. And so he's bringing that kind of magic into his own world. For him, it's connected to his religion, but I'm sure for a lot of people, it's connected to whatever is personal and important to them. So that line kind of didn't directly come out of Hopkins, but it's that idea, is that everybody has an individual experience of the world and everybody brings their own magic to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Good answer.
So obviously the book is set in the city of York. You've pulled heavily from the existing layout of York, as well as certain character influences. So is there anything in particular that draws you to York, and what makes it special to you?
So it's the most haunted city in Europe, and it's sometimes known as like the city of 1,000 ghosts. Funny enough, I had never visited York before I wrote this book. And I only got to visit York when I was editing right before the first lockdown. I was lucky enough to get there before COVID hit, and I edited the book in the locations and in this different scenes, but I wrote the whole thing before I ever visited. So I have relatives in Yorkshire, but we just never got to York. And in my head, as you do, I sort of built it up as this amazing city, which it is. It certainly did not disappoint when I finally got there. And I think I've just been looking for an excuse to set a book in York forever. And when I knew I wanted to write about ghosts, it just seemed like the best choice, the obvious choice. It had to be York. Yeah.
Okay. Because as you mentioned in the book, there were quite a few other haunted cities. It's interesting that I suppose maybe the fact you hadn't been there is kind of a lure to you, somewhere new.
Yeah, I think it was also, you know, I could maybe set it. I live in the south coast of England, so I was like, I could set it along somewhere on the south coast, which would be a very different vibe. That's possible, a bit more rural. I could set it in London, like every other fantasy and every other urban fantasy novel in existence. So I kind of wanted to avoid that. I love urban fantasy set in London, but it has been done so often that I just wanted to do something different. And then I would love to read more stories set in Northern England as well. Like it just we're always so focused on the south, and I just would love to read more books set in the north. So I thought, okay, right, let's write one set there. But that's a lot of extra work for me as an author because I don't live there permanently. I have to travel there and rely on friends and family who live there to help me out and kind of get the vibe right, the atmosphere right.
That leads us quite nicely into the next question, which is how much research did you have to do on the city of York during your writing process? The next part of the question was, did you stay there? And if you did you have any regular writing haunts? But obviously you didn't until you edited.
I didn't.
Now that you have visited, is there anywhere where you would go and write now that you know the city a little bit better?
I mean, ideally, I would write the scene that I was writing in the location I was writing it. I'm a very visual person, and I had to heavily rely on Google Maps. I would like to send them a tray of tea cakes to say thank you, because I was able to literally like walk the streets and look up at all the buildings and go into some of the buildings. Everybody who's visited York and put all their photographs, thank you, thank you, thank you, because that's what I relied on, coupled with reading a lot of books set in York and Yorkshire and a lot of like travel journals, both historical and contemporary, and memoirs of the city. There are some amazing blogs of people just sharing their memories of growing up in the city, kind of talking about how things have changed, so I could get a sense of what the city was like in the 50s, in the 1800s, like, because I have ghosts walking the streets who were there at that time. So I had to try and understand all that. In terms of like particular places, I like to make a nuisance of myself and get my laptop out in completely ridiculous places, like the middle of the Minster, because I'm like, inspiration. I'm going to sit on the floor and write a scene, and people are like, what are you doing? But York is full of amazing like cafes, bars, pubs. Just go somewhere, just go anywhere in York that you will find an amazing cafe, bar, or pub to park yourself in, and enjoy. I mean, if you wanted to get like super classic York, you could always go to Betty's Tea Rooms, because it's like an establishment there.
Oh, I went there. It was really nice.
It's nice, right?
Yeah.
Very good cake.
So I'm actually going back to York with my partner in November. Where do you recommend that we go based on your experience of York? Because we've got a few places in mind that we want to go, but I'd be interested to. I'm trying to pull ideas at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the obvious one is the Minster, because it literally dominates York. It's got incredible architecture. It's got a museum as well beneath it where you can see parts of the old Roman wall. It's got a lot going on. In, you know, for the price of the ticket, you actually get quite a lot. It's like a whole afternoon's worth of time. Plus, the stained glass from the inside is incredible. It's really beautiful, and the light just hits the kind of honey walls and it bounces. It's just stunning. I think you can also go up the tower, though I haven't been up, but I think you can. So yeah, it's a really nice spot, and I've actually never been when they weren't doing works on it of some kind, but the stonemason's yard is just around the corner, and they have, at least at the moment, if you go round one side of the Minster where all the scaffolding is, they've laid out a lot of the stones that they're working on, and you can chat to them as they work, and they will explain to you what they're doing and how they're saving like this lost art of maintaining buildings with traditional stonemasonry. It's really interesting. They're always trying to do educational stuff as they go. So worth doing. I think also it does mean queuing, but the York Ghost Merchants on the Shambles, or just the Shambles in general. Yeah, little ghost. I got my little ghost.
Yeah, I've got a few of those. My boyfriend and I love them.
Yeah, when I first went to York, they just set up. They were not popular at all. They were brand new, and there was no queue. I was in there for an hour chatting to them, and Now you have to queue for quite a while to get in, but I think it is worth it. The ghosts are lovely, and they're just an amazing company. I really like their ethos. They're always giving to charity and doing interesting ghost trails in York. Look up the ghost trail, actually, because they do a yearly ghost trail. I'm not sure when it is, but look it up. And then the final thing I would suggest is, have you heard of the York Cat Trail?
No, I haven't actually.
So, these sculptures of different cats were originally put on buildings in order to scare away mice, and also cats, sort of in terms of superstition, can bring good luck. And then some people got hold of this idea and they added more. And so you can go on a trail around the centre of York and look for these cats, and they're all different colours, shapes, sizes, and they're all different sculptures. And it's something it's free to do. And while you're exploring looking for cats, you're going to find all sorts of really fun other things that you might want to spend time doing. So you can download, if you type in like York Cat Trail into Google, you can download the free trail, or pretty much any local kind of hotel will probably have a copy that you can take away.
Okay, we will definitely do that because we love cats. Sounds like a really good way to see the city. So definitely will check that out. Thank you.
So you clearly love a spooky vibe. So are all your future novels, assuming there's going to be future novels, are all your future novels going to be based in and around the supernatural world, or is this a one-off?
I am more likely to write speculative fiction than anything else. I would never rule anything out. One thing that surprised me about writing this book was some of my favourite parts to write with the sort of more domestic side of things. But part of the joy of that was I was still writing a domestic kind of contemporary scene, but half of the people in the conversation were dead. So maybe it's always kind of about the speculative element. But certainly future projects will be, if not spooky, certainly fantastical. But I do like my darker themes. So there will probably be some darker themes in there, no matter what I do.
And you mentioned that domestic element. That's an aspect of the book that I really enjoyed. So a lot of your ghost stories and that kind of fiction, it's quite fantastical, which is great. But I really enjoyed how human it made it feel and how relatable the story became. The fact that it's, mid-argument with mum and dad, and then all of a sudden, ghost. And it was a really different way of reading that form of literature, and it was it was really human, and I really enjoyed it. It was good.
Oh, I'm glad you like that part. I love, there's a strange kind of magic that happens when the mundane and the extraordinary combine, and I love exploring that, and I do think that my writing moving forward will continue to explore those themes.
Good.
And is there anything in particular that sparked your affinity for ghosts and the afterlife in particular?
I just think I'm a little bit fascinated by death. I know that sounds really strange, but
can relate.
I mean, it's there, it's looming, it's mysterious, it's kind of scary, but also just ripe for like world building and themes and kind of fun ideas to play with. When I was doing a writing course with Curtis Brown, and a guest author said to us that you will always write about something, and you probably won't recognize what that thing is until you're on book 3 or 4. It could be motherhood, it could be whatever. And I just sat there and thought, I write about death. Like, I just knew it. Like, I'm pretty sure that no matter what I do in the future, like death and the exploration of what that means will always be a theme there.
The thing is, with death as well, it opens up so many doors options wise for writing, because with like historical fiction, the further back you go, the less sources there are. So the more creative license you've got, you can play in a lot of space, you can make up whatever you want, and nobody can question it because it's like a scraping on a wall. Like, you can interpret that ancient history however you want. And with death, none of us know. So you've literally got that whole space to just really flex that creative muscle. No, it's a really interesting space to play in. It's good. Yeah.
Plus, I like being a little bit scared, so.
Spooky vibes. Something else that I personally enjoyed for obvious reasons. Did you find it challenging slipping into the Northern mindset to enable you to produce the authentic dialogue that you put in? And is there anyone in particular who you drew your inspiration from when you were writing that part of your novel?
It was a lot of research, and then it was a lot of trying to work out how much to put in, because there's a lot of discussion within literature of how to do different dialects in a book so that it flows naturally for a reader. I mean, I find a lot of those do tend to center Southern English perspectives. So this idea of like, oh, you can't put that much in because people in the South won't be able to understand what's going on and won't be able to understand some of the words. So I definitely ended up playing around, like sometimes it was more in, sometimes it was less, and just trying to find a happy medium for what works for the characters so they all have their distinctive voice without it ever being too little or too much. I wanted people to read it being like, yeah, this is set in York. But again, not being from there, I read as many novels as I could find set in Yorkshire and set in York, but all over Yorkshire, because again, Charlie's father is from the Dales, so he has a slightly different accent. So I actually read God's Own Country by Ross Racing, I think it was, as one of the first books I read, which is beautifully written, and it's very literary and it's a very dark story, but the whole thing is written in, it's almost like a mind flow from this farmer's perspective. And it's a very strong Yorkshire accent, far stronger than I would ever need for Charlie and his family, like far stronger. But it just kind of was like, okay, this is the most extreme kind of version. Where do I want to sit? And from his and many other books, and listening to, you're gonna laugh. I scoured YouTube for YouTubers who are from the area, and radio shows from, listen to York radio, and just like picked out phrases that people were using, and be like, okay, so this is part of the dialect in the local area. I could use this. What does it mean? And again, then just toned it down or up as I needed, and had a lot of beta readers, some of whom were from York or had studied in York, to give me guidance. And I probably will not have got it right for everybody, but hopefully for a lot of people it's enjoyable.
You got it right, Chris. Okay, so this one's quite an important one, I think. So your representation of the LGBTQIA+ community in 16 Souls is ever present, and with many of the characters, even the side ones and the dead ones, they fall under this umbrella in some way, which makes me smile as a fellow bisexual person, because of the ways which queer people kind of group together, even without even realizing that they just kind of find their people. Has this always been a theme you were keen to tread in your storytelling, and why do you think it's so important?
I grew up reading books where everybody was straight, and that was just the default, and I didn't realize that there was the option. And then I discovered queer coded literature, and I was like, hold on a second, I think this might be fruity. And then I did some research, went, this is definitely fruity. And then as years went by, more and more sort of overtly queer books started coming out, and I realized that I was allowed to write queer characters, that was something that I could do and still aim to be published. And I've gone for quite subtle representation, in the sense that it's not subtle at all, because pretty much everybody's queer, but it's not really a big deal, and it's not a book about what it is to be queer or gay. That's just something that a lot of the characters are. And I wanted to make it just really natural, because we're here, we're mates with each other, we hang out, we fight evil, we do all the cool stuffs. And I wanted that book to reflect, real life queer friendship groups, just with more ghosts.
Yeah, I thought even the ghosts, even like the old ones, like Villiers, for example, is very openly gay, despite being born in like the 17th century, when it perhaps might have, not quite as frowned upon as it might have been in like the Victorian period, for example. But he's still very open about it, and it is just like something that he is. It's not, as you say, it doesn't really become an issue, and he's quite open that he's happy to tell these people. So yeah, that definitely comes across.
Yeah, both Sally and myself, we both spoke after reading, and both our favorite characters was Villiers. Who is your personal favorite character, and who was the easiest to write and who was the hardest to write?
Well, I have to love all of my babies equally. That's the rule. I can't.
Oh, come on.
I can't pick a favorite child. I can't pick a favorite child. But I did enjoy writing Villiers. He was a bit of a surprise. He's not a ghost from York. He was knifed in a pub in Portsmouth, so he shouldn't even be in York. But he came to York to look for his son, who is a Yorkshire ghost story in York. And he didn't find his son, but he did find a cute boyfriend, so he stayed. And he was just fun. He kind of wrote himself. I just had to work his dialogue to make it kind of work with the era he was from enough. But he was always stepping in and throwing lines into the story, and I'm like, oh, come on, Villiers, it's not about you, mate. But it is about Villiers. It's always about Villiers. So I did really, I did really enjoy writing him. I also really enjoyed writing Heather. I mean,
my second favorite. I love her.
She's very bittersweet, like, but she has so many secrets, and there's so much going on with her. And with her, you know, Villiers is not. There's nothing subtle about Villiers. Heather is a lot of subtlety, and so it was a very different approach to that character. So I liked having characters on both sides of that. The hardest to write was probably Sam, I think, because I wanted to give him his own arc and his own focus. I didn't want him to just be the love interest. And I already knew as I started writing that he was going to be incredibly wrapped up in the story. Like, it very much could not happen without him. So getting to know him was a little bit harder, because I wasn't writing from his point of view, and he was more than a side character to me. So it was like trying to write a secondary protagonist without being allowed inside their head. So I did have to do a lot more work with him, but hopefully I've succeeded and brought him to life. I love him. He's a sweetheart. I love him. Yeah.
And speaking of Sam, how did you go about writing characters whom you don't share an identity with? So, for example, Charlie is an amputee and gay, and Sam is trans. So, how did you ensure your writing of characters like these were authentic?
So, two things: a lot of research, like a lot of research, and sensitivity readers who are invaluable, and every writer should strive to reach out to sensitivity readers and work with them, because that's one thing I knew going in when I was going to write rep outside of my own experience, was like, so I am queer, but I don't, that just because I'm queer doesn't mean I'm going to get every single buddy under the umbrella's identity, right? That's not my experience at all. We are many, we are legion. So
even within our own umbrella.
Yeah, like I need to have first-hand kind of readers who have that lived experience give me feedback. And then particularly when it came to the disability rep, I have a hidden disability, but my limitations, struggles are completely different to what an amputee would experience. And even within, as I've learned from my research, if you're an amputee, Charlie's experience of being an amputee is not going to necessarily vibe with a bunch of other people who are amputees, because it is quite a unique experience. When I went in, I thought, oh yeah, there'll be like general truths or general. Some people have various things, some people just never experience that. So again, getting that sensitivity read and knowing that it's one particular person's experience, it's not going to cover everybody's experience, and that's impossible to do. So it's about getting it right for my character's situation and personality and world, basically, and hoping I've done a good job. I would never want to not be open to criticism. I think it's really important to take criticism and feedback on board. It is not a perfect book. It will never be a perfect book. So hopefully I'll get some feedback from readers on that, and continue to get better at putting good representation in.
I personally find your representation of disability really good. Like, I thought it was brilliant. It was very subtly present the whole way through the novel. It wasn't in your face, and there was a lot of
never
detail.
Forgotten either. It was always there.
It's always present, and you're reminded consistently through the mundane, through the domestic life, and it was just grounding the story over and over again. It was really well written. Is there a reason you chose to give Charlie prosthetic legs? Is disability representation something that you hold close to your heart, similar to your other themes?
Yeah, I think it is. It's something I would love to see more of in books in general. I think it's really important. We quite often don't see it on the page. And I think it's partly because maybe a lot of writers have no experience of disability themselves, and so it's not something they even think about to include. And then if you are including it, it's a lot of research, and it's a risk because you might get it wrong. it's important because you have to provide good representation, because providing bad representation is actively harmful to a community who are often marginalized already. Like, there's a lot of ableism out there already. So yeah, it was just, it's something I think if we're going to do in books, we need to really do it well. So there is a lot of pressure there, but I just think it's so vital. Like, every time I read a book where I have a character who's struggling, not even with the situation I'm in, but just who has physical limitations or is dealing with chronic pain, and they're still going on these adventures, it's like, yeah, of course you are. Of course you're the hero of your own story. Like, we're all out here living our lives and doing cool stuff and falling in love, and okay, maybe not, you know, dealing with ghost snappers, but that's a very specific situation.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of create a story where, like you say, Charlie's disability is never forgotten. It can't be forgotten. It's literally part of his body, mind, and his experience. But it is also not a book about what it's like to be an amputee, because that's not my lived experience to write. That's not my space to take up. And the reason I chose to make Charlie an amputee came from the world building and the research. So this isn't really a spoiler. This is just basic world building stuff. But in order to become a seer, the individual has to die and come back. And so when I was researching the most common causes of death in children, meningitis came up top. So I was like, okay. So I started researching that. I was like, if he had died of meningitis and returned, that's a very serious case of meningitis. And when I looked through all of the different physical effects that has on the body, it would be very unlikely that he would return without any physical scarring. And meningitis creates these blood clots that block blood flow to the limbs. So it would make sense for him to be an amputee. And I was talking to somebody about this, and they said, you can't make an amputee the hero of an action adventure story. And I said, watch me. Why can't he be the hero of an action adventure story?
Yeah, why can't
why not? And that just annoyed me so much that I was like, you bet I can, because he deserves to be the main character, so he's gonna be. So that's kind of how it happened. It was a bit of world building coupled with something of a unexpected challenge.
Personal vendetta. They say like lots of writing happens because the writer gets pissed off with someone and they just and they want revenge on the page. So yeah, you do a really good job from what I can see. I don't have not an amputee, but I do have chronic pain, and so I really appreciate it being in there. And how involved were your sensitivity readers in the process? With like, did you have them at the very beginning, or did they come in kind of towards the end?
They came in at the end. So I used my research to write the whole manuscript, and then I sent it to them, and then they fed back. And I had more changes with the disability rep than I did with queer rep. I didn't really have many changes at all actually with the queer rep. It was more getting the different perspectives and discussing the nuances of all the points that were made and what effects they might have. That was really handy. But with the disability rep, you know, I did have feedback of, oh, you know, Charlie wouldn't do this or would do that, or actually like the way he does this is phrased slightly wrong. Like, it was a lot of little things that really made a big difference. Like, I didn't have to massively change any scenes or any events that happened, but it was just the little line edits to make it work and to make it more authentic to the true experience, which I obviously can't do myself.
Yeah, little changes make a big impact, kind of thing. It's a slightly different topic. Are there any books that part inspired or impacted your writing of 16 Souls? So what books would you recommend to someone who loved your book?
Oh, so
time.
there's been a lovely flurry of kind of books about queer kids and ghosts, which I feel lucky to be a part of. So while I was writing, I think I just finished my first draft. Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas was announced, and I was so excited.
That was on about
I had to wait a whole year to read this book, because by the time it came out, and then I was waiting for it in the Rainbow Crate. So, you know, by the time it got to me, I was like waiting 9 months to a year for this, and it did not disappoint. I loved it. Like, it's it's got more romance, I think, than mine does, and it's more romance focused. It's set in the States. It's got a Latinx protagonist. So it's a very different world and different world building. That's absolutely fantastic, and I just really enjoyed it. Another one would be The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas.
I really want to read that one. The cover is amazing.
That is also fantastic. It's less. Yeah, it's I would say definitely check content warnings for it though, because it comes with, I think, a lot heavier content. And the style of it, it's quite short, and the world building is not necessarily clear, and you have to just kind of piece it together as you go. But I quite like that challenge, what was going on, but I was there for it, and the writing's very beautiful, even though it's very brutal at the same time. It kind of is brutal and beautiful. So definitely those. I would also say, going way back, Anna Dressed in Blood by Kendara Blake. Because I mean, oldie but a good one, and it's about a young man who is a ghost hunter. So it kind of it's quite different from mine in that the ghosts are very much the bad guys, but it was very enjoyable. I loved reading it. So yeah, those three. And if you don't want ghosts, but you want something that's like got the found family vibes, Big Bad Me. I don't know if you've heard of this one. It's a YA. It's by an Irish author called Aisling O'Loughlin, and it's kind of like if Teen Wolf and Buffy had a baby, and that was a book, it would be this book. And it's just such a fun romp, and it's got all those like found family vibes, and you've got werewolves and you've got vampires, and it's brilliant. It's very good fun.
We have one more book specific question before continuing with writing tips. I love the use of old legends such as King Aiel. How did you decide who made the cut into the Moldy Oldies? It's quite a top tier table, isn't it?
It is, and it was hard, and I knew I couldn't have too many of them because I already have a lot of characters in this book. Oh, it was heartbreaking to have to kind of narrow it down, and I still have those beloved ghosties. They're still in York. Just because they didn't make the cut doesn't mean they're not going to appear at some point in my world. Yeah, I just researched a whole load of ghost stories, and I knew that the Moldy Oldies were going to be older ghosts.
Yeah.
That's part of what they pride, is that they've been around a reasonably long time.
Yeah.
And they sort of have that snobbery around how long you've been dead. So yeah, I researched local legends, I researched local ghosts, and I had to just select them based on different eras. I didn't want anybody to be in exactly the same era, so it kind of shows a bit of the history of York. So you've got Emperor Septimus Severus from the Roman era. There's a Viking Moldy Oldie. There's St. Margaret Clitheroe and her very unfortunate front door incident. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix, but I enjoyed researching them, and I have a little folder of York ghosts who hopefully will wander onto the pages at some point.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to ask if there are any that didn't make the cut, but maybe you're keeping them back for the future. So. Okay.
I might be not able to talk about them very much.
So where did your reading experience begin? Are there any books in particular that you really loved as a child that got you into reading or changed your reading habits at some point in your life?
Yeah, so I was raised on a steady diet of mythology and as fairy tales. You get these books where it's like Greek mythology for kids, African mythology for kids. We just had loads of those, and I read those on repeat. So we had a lot of fairy tales, a lot of mythology. And then when I started picking up sort of more middle grade type books, I read all of the Garth Nix and Tamara Pierce. Absolutely. Like, if I met her, I would cry. Like, she is my childhood. So, like, the Alana series and Keladri of Minderland, though, I know she's maybe not as exciting as Alana's story, but I love that domesticity and the fact that she doesn't have any magic and she has to rely on other things to kind of win the day. She isn't a chosen one. She's just a normal girl who wants to be a knight. She's the best. Yeah, and Tamara's written a lot of books. So I have read all of them.
Still writing them, I think, as well. Still coming out.
Still reading them, yeah.
Yeah.
And then as I got a bit older, I kind of discovered Neil Gaiman, and I read quite a lot of Neil Gaiman as a sort of older teen, both graphic novels like Sandman and books of magic, and also actually probably was reading him because I read books of magic when I was about 12 or 13. So yeah, I probably discovered him a bit earlier than I thought, but certainly some of his novels I didn't read till like later. I think he was writing other things first. Yeah,
there's a lot of urban fantasy, doesn't he, like with ghosts as well and supernatural entities. I can see that influence.
He did the Graveyard book, which I do love. Yeah, I do love the Graveyard book as well, and then probably another good one to pick up if you like 16 Souls.
Thank you.
What kind of writer are you? Do you fit into like the gardener architect archetypes, or are you a hybrid? Where do you see yourself on that spectrum?
I am a chaos demon.
And
I'm a bit of a baby writer. 16 Souls is only my second ever attempt at a book, so I'm still working out what works best for me. And
I'm really impressed that that's your second book, if that's the case. It's so good.
It's my second book.
Yeah.
And I still have high hopes for my first book. It just needs tearing apart and rearranging because it's far too long. I basically got 2 books in one, so I need to rework it, which at some point I would love to do. But I would say I'm more of a discovery writer, but then I force myself to be an architect at some point because one must get the story done, as it were.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I take my concept and I just free write for probably 15 to 20,000 words. And I'm not trying to think about overall plot at that point. I'm just asking myself, why is the reader still reading? What's the hook? But, and then as I go through, I'll answer some of those hooks and keep them going. And then when I get to like 20,000 words, I'll stop and go, okay, where is this story going? What are the rules of the world that I've put in? Am I keeping them? Am I not keeping them? And I'm changing them? And then the whole thing will sort of slowly come together, and I'll have to pause and redo that structuring every once in a while until I have a whole book.
Did you go through a process of like setting aside X amount of time a day, a week, or did you just kind of write when inspiration hit?
I think if I write when inspiration hits, I would never sleep, and I would probably never get a book done because my brain seems to be like, here's some great ideas. It's 2:00 in the morning and you have work tomorrow. The best I could do is sit up and bullet point them, and then I have to come back to them when actually I'm probably not in the mood and I just want to watch Netflix. So I think sometimes scenes just flow out of you, and it's amazing because you can write 4,000 or 5,000 words in one day, and it's like, oh. And sometimes you're not in the zone, it's agonizing, and you just have to like slowly get through it. But ultimately, once that book's edited, I couldn't tell you which scenes flowed and which scenes I had to fight for. They all end up at the same level. But yeah, so I'm not a carve out time and be like, I have to get up at this time and write for this amount of time. I'm a little bit, again, chaos demon. Whatever works for me at that time is how I get things done.
So long as the words get down, that's all that matters, right?
Whatever's gonna work at that particular moment is how we go.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it, but someone said that like writing was like basically staring at a screen until blood comes out your forehead, like just until something comes out.
Oh my god, I feel so called out. That is painful. Yeah.
So in your acknowledgements at the back, you mentioned this was originally on the way to be a self-published book, but you got picked up by Scholastic. So what were you doing when you found out that you were being picked up by Scholastic, and how did you react?
I was at work. I was at the bookshop, and on the lead up, it didn't come out of completely nowhere because they obviously had to ask for the manuscript to read. So I had a message from an author friend, Cynthia Murphy, who is a fabulous author, and everybody should read her book. She writes these kind of speculative teen thrillers. They're brilliant. But we'd worked together on Write Mentors. I was her mentee, and Jazz Morrissey, who's at Scholastic, who ended up picking me up, is her editor. And I think Yaz and I had met like extremely briefly at an event earlier in the summer. It was literally a hi and bye kind of a thing. And then a little while later, I think she connected that I was the author who'd written that book that was kind of just had a cover reveal on TikTok. and she asked to read the manuscript. So I sent it, not expecting to hear anything particularly, and then within a week they offered on 2 books, and I was at work and I got a text saying, oh, are you able to do a phone call at some point today? And I was like, yeah, I've got my lunch coming up. So I took my lunch 10 minutes early and I sat in the stockroom on a chair and I had a conversation that changed everything.
How was it concentrating after receiving that news? Should have just work gets on for the day.
I think I just smiled a lot, but also in my head I was like thinking about all the work that I had to do, because I'd put all these things in place that I was going to have to undo in order, all the distribution I'd set up, well, the ISBN was going to be expired, everything had to change. So it was a lot of questions in my head going like, how are we going to do this? How quickly can we do this? But in the end it worked out really well, and I only had to lie once on TikTok, and I hate doing it. It was really stressful. But because the ISBN got cancelled, so everybody's pre-orders got cancelled at once, and I wasn't allowed to tell people for like 3 days, and I just had an entire inbox of DMs of people being like, just to let you know this happened, is everything okay? And I couldn't tell them the truth. So I put up a video of me being like, I'm aware this has happened, and I'll fix it and I'll have news on Monday, kind of pretending like it wasn't planned. But and nobody, only one person messaged me saying, you don't fool me, you've got a book deal. But other than that, it's worked. But I don't Book Talk is just an extension of me. So I don't feel comfortable not being honest on there. So it was really uncomfortable to do. I still don't like that the video's up there, but I had to do it.
For a good reason.
Yeah.
It was a very good reason. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to any writers at the beginning of their journey? Is there anything in particular that helped you?
I would say okay, this is going to sound really cliche, and I'm so sorry. Write combination of decide what you want. Are you writing for yourself and your friends and just enjoying the process, or do you want to be published one day? Because if you want to be published one day, that's a quite different approach in theory. You don't have to start off with that in mind, but it really helps if you know what genre you're writing for, who your target audience is, like all of these kind of things that publishers and agents will ask you later. You're going to save yourself a whole lot of emotional turmoil if you decide that at the beginning before you start writing that book. But if you're just writing for yourself, do not worry about it. You don't have to worry about that. Just go for it. But I'm not saying write to market. I'm still saying write the story you love and the story that you really, really want to read. That's hugely important. 16 Souls was written for me. It's the queer disaster teen saving the world book that I wanted as a teenager and never got. That's why I wrote it. But I did know that I would one day want to publish it. So I did start off by writing myself a mini blurb and a mini pitch and thinking if I was telling an agent about this in a lift, what would I say? And that helped guide me through the book. Because again, as a chaos demon, I need all the guidance I can get. So I would say if you definitely know you want to try and publish, just keep its commercial product in mind, to give yourself the tools that when you come to write your agent letter, it's not like pulling your own teeth out your skull with pliers, because it's not a fun process. And then the other advice I would give is writing is a very long road. It is a very, very long road, and there's no guarantees that you're going to get to the end. So write because you love it, and then keep going. Because the difference between writers who get to the end and get their work out into the world and writers who don't are the ones who keep going. It's persistence. It is a marathon. Just keep going. Even when you're tired, when you don't want to write, or you feel like, you'll never find an agent or you'll never find a publisher. I was rejected by every agent I submitted to. Every single one. Every single one said no to me. They didn't see the potential in Charlie. Even if they loved the writing, even if they loved something about it, it wasn't quite the perfect fit. And then I went and got a book deal on my own. So don't stop yourself. And I know it's hard, right? It's hard because we doubt ourselves constantly, particularly as creative people. We're always thinking, I'm not good enough. Well, you are good enough. Keep writing.
Really good advice.
Good words.
Thank you. So I wanted to know who your favourite ghost is, both real and fictional, because we have quite a few in both real life and fiction.
Shout out to the woman in black for scaring the bejesus.
Such a good choice. You seen the play in London?
Oh my gosh, I'm still not recovered. The rocking chair, what? I'm every version of that I've seen or watched or read. I love her because she's terrifying. I also have a weird soft spot. Have you seen the movie Mama? It's like a horror movie, Mama, and it's about these two girls who get lost in the woods or something, and they end up being looked after by this ghost who is like their mama. And when they're found and adopted by a family, Mama goes with them, and she does not like the fact that they have other parents now. And it's a great little horror movie, and I just quite like the character of Mama. I think she's really well visualized, and she has an interesting kind of backstory. So I quite like her.
I'm a big softie for supernatural like horror films and programs. Like I'm sweating just thinking about all that I've been forced to watch. Like Haunted Hill House absolutely ruined me.
That also I'm still no. It's just it's good though. It's so good.
So good.
Yeah.
It's good. I enjoy them, and I enjoy the process. But I think that the difference being is, so say I watch a slasher hacker horror film. If somebody bursts through my door with a machete in his hand, I can maybe on an outside chance deal with it. Can't deal with the supernatural. Like, I've got no defense against that, so it stresses me out.
It is stressful, and I think in a lot of horror stories, the targets of paranormal activity and other things, I swear, there are always people who always have a horrible tragedy in their life already. And I'm just like, haven't they suffered enough? And you're now going to let them move into this haunted house where they're going to be terrorized by this being when they've just like lost their whole family in a tragic plane accident, or like whatever it is. It's always like horrible. They're always really, it's never like, oh yeah, we're just like really chill, and it's
I suppose the ghosts are preying on weakness, aren't they? Like these people are vulnerable.
Yeah.
So
do you have any favorite real ghosts? Because I'm like, what is it? What is a real ghost? I've only ever met one, and so she has to be my favorite because she's the only ghost I've ever experienced. So we're gonna go for her.
And talk about that. Do you want to give us more information?
Well, so when I lived in Brighton, I lived with my friend Fran and her son, and there was this like, and I don't know, there was something in that house. There was something so she was at work, I think, and I was working late in restaurants and bars and stuff. So I get up at kind of brunch time, and she would make brunch, and we'd hang out and we'd chat in the kitchen. It was awesome. And I woke up and I heard her making brunch, and I was like, yes, I am going down. And I went down the stairs, and I had to cross the living room to get to the kitchen around the corner. And as soon as I touched the kitchen door, the noises stopped. And when I opened the kitchen door, there was nobody in there, nothing disturbed. She hadn't just walked out the back to get some herbs from the garden. Like, she was not home. I was highly disappointed because I wanted brunch. But I didn't think anything else of it. I just thought, oh, I'm mistaken. Got to the bottom of the stairs, and as soon as I put my foot on that step, the noises started up again.
Oh.
Yeah. Not a superstitious person. I don't have a tendency to believe in anything. But I was still a bit like, that's weird. Went back to the kitchen again. The noises completely stopped. I ended up like putting my ear to the wall, but the neighbors? Is it the neighbors? It was not the neighbors. Like, you couldn't hear that amount of noise through the walls. And so the third time I went in with the noises and they stopped, I could smell like flowers. And I was like, this is weird. But I was never scared. I was just more irritated that there was no brunch.
I'd have been absolutely terrified.
When my friend came home, I mentioned it to her, and she was like, oh yes, I think, she said, it's this particular relative, and I think it's my grandma, and she liked this perfume, and and sometimes she's just around. And I just went, okay, and I just accepted it because I can't.
It's a right move.
I can't explain what I experienced. I don't know if I believe it was a ghost, but I certainly have no reasonable explanation for the alternative. So yeah, if there was that particular floral smell somewhere, I would just come back later. Because it wasn't ever a scary present, so she's my favorite.
Yeah, I think all the experience, like, so I have personally not encountered ghosts or anything like that, but like members of my family have, and they're like you described, that kind of benevolent relatives who are still hanging around and doing stuff for the family. I think I had like a piece of art coursework that had to be due, and I wanted to, the like dollies with the hole in the middle, and it's like an alternative from crochet. I wanted to do something with that, but we couldn't find the dolly, and I think like the next day my nan found it in the middle of the table in the dining room, and it used to belong to my Aunt Sally, so there was a possibility that she had left it there. I don't know. But yes, it's strange. You hear about how scary and awful ghosts are, but then every time I've had someone describe a ghost experience, it's always like that kind of nice presence.
I think I have as well.
I have a question though, along those lines. If you were a ghost, like if you died tomorrow, came back, what would you do?
I'd haunt my little brother. Without a shadow of a doubt, I would harass him daily.
I think I'd travel. I'd want to travel the world. Like, I would be able to get around without. I mean, assuming I am an untethered ghost, of course. If I were tethered, I'd have a little bit more trouble. Yeah, I think I'd want to see the world and go into, and also you get to see places that you, even as a tourist, you wouldn't be allowed in. I'd love to explore Highgate Cemetery properly, because when you go there on the East Cemetery, the West Cemetery, it's very, you're on a tour, you can't deviate. So I'd like to go back there and have a look around, like stuff like that. I'm nosy and want to know more.
I feel like I didn't.
And then I guess I'd probably come back.
Now.
Sorry, say that again, Chris.
I feel like I didn't think through my answer enough now. You've got plans of grandeur.
No, but I like your immediate knowledge. Like, yeah, no, I would be hiding things in my brother's room. I would be turning things upside down. I would be making his life traumatic. I mean,
why not?
Why not?
As in death, as in life. Yeah, I am. So obviously, you're in and around the southeast. So where Horsham McDonald's used to be, right? So I used to work at that McDonald's. So I was like 17 at the time, and the stock room for that is upstairs. And we'd have to put away, obviously, the stock deliveries that would come in. They'd be upstairs. So I was like 17 at the time, and upstairs it's all split into like different rooms. You've got a fridge, freezer, room, and I'm in this freezer, like lumping boxes of frozen fries. And as I like hung out of the door to pull another box out the cage, and I'm so sure of this, and like you, I don't particularly like believe, so it really unsettled me at the time. But like there was somebody stood in the doorway, and it was obviously darker because there were light sensors, like the light switches, so it was darkened. But there was somebody in the doorway watching me unload this cage. But as soon as like it was only in the peripheral, but as soon as I looked up, it just gone. Like it moved so fast, and I cannot tell you how much it freaked me out, because I'm basically a man-child, 17 years old, working hard, sweaty, and I'm on my own up there, and I have to get past that doorway to go back downstairs to get to people, and I was just like, and then I carried on, and where I'd been taking a long time because I kept like dipping my head out the door to look at this doorway, the freezer had started to defrost a bit, so then when I was putting it away, it was like dripping on my neck and things. I was like, every time. Yeah. But then other people have, so I think way back when, I don't know how old you are, so I don't know if you remember, but before McDonald's, I think it was a Tesco, and somebody died in that fridge freezer way back when. That's
like the big walk-in ones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where like all the frozen goods are. Somebody died. Somebody got locked in and died in there years and years and years, like decades ago. And yeah, that's my
very scary. Was it? Because I feel like with my ghost story, you know, you feel a presence, but it was a friendly presence. With yours, it sounds like it was kind of not a friendly feeling.
It wasn't like friendly or unfriendly, but it was just really unsettling because I didn't know whether I'd seen it or not. But then we were watching the CCTV back afterwards, and you could just see me like popping my head out the door, just like looking at nothing, like.
Have you seen that
Yeah.
short video on YouTube, Lights Out? That's what that story you just told reminds me of. Have you seen it?
No.
Oh, it's like
What's
it's on YouTube. It's this 7-minute video. It got turned into a film actually. But when I first started dating my boyfriend, obviously I'm quite gothy and I like death and ghosts and things. He knew I liked spooky things, but he didn't know my limits at that point. So he showed me this video. I think it was like in the morning. We were both in bed just relaxing, and he showed me like this video, and I did not sleep for about 5 days. It was so scary.
Lights Out.
Lights Out, but it's like that silhouette in the doorway that you described,
Yeah.
very much reminiscent of that. So yeah, go watch that, Chris.
God, it's so like ingrained in the back of my head. Like it was a really bizarre experience, and like I've experienced a lot of like random white feathers as well, like just appearing like so like I'll be watching like particularly when I've got young kids anyway, but even when they were even younger. So when my eldest was little, like I'd be watching TV, we're just like mooching around in the front room, and then I just look down to be a white feather in the middle of the front room. Windows
That's
are
weird.
shut, doors are shut, and it's just like, where has that come from? Like, it just came out of nowhere, just on the floor, no movement, just there. And I'm just like, what? So like little things like that
In
have
our
always
house,
made.
that
Sorry,
means
go on.
that there's the remains of a bird somewhere because the cats have got something, and we're like,
This was pre-cat. So I've got cats
Pre-cat.
now. So now that would be the answer.
That would be
But
the
this was
answer.
pre-cat. But I never really believed, or I'm not sure if I believe now, but things like that often make me stop and think and go, and I want to believe. It's nice to think there's something else there, isn't there?
I think it's comforting that the idea that there are something after death, because you want to see your loved ones again, and you want to believe that it's not the end. I'm trying to live my life as if there is nothing, because I don't want to miss out on anything, but I also I suppose I don't want it to affect my moral behavior. I want to make a difference here and now, if that makes sense.
I think as I've got older and started like losing people, like grandparents, things like that, particularly over the last few years, it's really started to like shift my perspective on it. I think I want to believe more now because of that. So I've been quite lucky. Like I'd only really lost one great grandparent in my teens, and apart from that, I hadn't lost any grandparents until like 2019, 2020. So like I was pretty oblivious to loss. So that having that shift was makes me crave something more, that you can tap into. But that's the feathers were pre that, so who knows?
Maybe there's somebody's always been looking out for you, and you just don't know.
Maybe I'm haunted.
An angel.
Maybe, or maybe it's just that figure in the stockroom at McDonald's following me around.
Just some random ghost who's like, you know what? He looks cool. I'm gonna hang out with him.
Let's follow this kid around.
Comics. Well, I think that's where my dedication for the book came from, which is, for the living, please read this book out loud for the dead. You never know what ghosts are hanging around, and they're probably really bored, everyone. So read whatever you're reading out loud so they can enjoy it. Unplug the cable and listen to that audiobook out loud so they can be like, you know what, this is cool, and read books too. Because if I was a ghost, I'd be very frustrated that I couldn't read books.
Yeah, that was another element that I loved in the book. Actually, you threaded that in throughout, like the reading with the ghost and moving the pages for him, and Broomwood watching the TV, watching CSI and things like that. Like, I loved it. It's a great detail. I'm gonna drag us back to the questions now. We're almost at the end. Similar question, not ghost related though. If you could have a dinner party with 3 fictional characters, who would they be and why?
Oh, okay, that's hard because I need to choose people who won't care about the quality of the food, because I'm not a great cook. I'm just not. I love food. I'm happy to eat stuff, but I'm not the best cook. So I would say Gideon the Ninth. From the lot.
Gideon herself.
Yeah, just Gideon. But then I feel like if Gideon comes, you have like Harrow has to be there. But then I'm kind of terrified.
That dinner party down, like in mood though.
But have you got Harrow the Ninth?
I have, yeah.
As long as she's not cooking, I think we'll be fine. I'm also just and I was like, who if I have to invite both of their Harrow, because I want Gideon, then Harrow as well, then who would like mélange well? Like, who would like be completely unflappable? Kelladry of Mindalan, because she takes everything in her stride and she can do her what she calls her lump face, where she shows no emotion and is just completely chilled, and she's really good. So I was like, we'd have Kel there, and it would just be me and Kel on one side, just looking at the kind of locked tomb chaos in the other. But as Gideon has to bring her really long sword. I think that's part of the deal. It's just to carve the turkey with. Not turkey. We would not have turkey. We could never cook turkey and make it good. I think it'd probably be a vegetarian meal, just in case. It would be vegetarian. Yeah.
Good answer. Maybe you should have included a fictional cook, you know, considering there's nobody there to do the cooking at this point.
Not
I think that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
We'll get takeout.
Could have invited Mitch.
I could have invited Mitch, but I should have invited Mitch. Bless him. He's stressed.
Maybe Mitch can be there, but he's just not invited to dinner, you know.
He's just cooking. Poor guy. No, we'll go to the restaurant that he gets his apprenticeship in, and he can cook for us there.
Sounds like a plan.
I kind of feel like you've answered this one already, because my last question was the end of the book left me feeling like it was a very satisfying ending. It was obviously a complete narrative closure, but there are also several unanswered questions. I can't say what because they'll be really spoilery, but I was going to ask, what is there going to be a sequel for Charlie and Co? And I suspect the answer is yes, based on the fact you're keeping some ghosts back.
Yeah, there is. So Scholastic offered on 2 books, the second one being a sequel. So I am currently immersed back in the world of 16 Souls, exploring their story moving forward, and it's so much fun. Also, so full of peril, and I just want to hug them and say I'm sorry, but as an author, it is my job to make your lives this difficult. Forgive me. And they probably wouldn't, but I'm having a great time.
Was that something that you had in the kind of back of your mind already when you were writing 16 Souls and going with Scholastic, that you, or did it just say, oh, we need a second book from you, please produce one?
It was always, I didn't know I would definitely write a sequel, but I wanted the option. And I knew that I was writing a world that was bigger than one book. So however I ended up closing the book, there were always going to be loose threads which were part of a wider world building. And if I got a chance to explore them, great. If I didn't, that's also okay, because the story wraps up enough to be a standalone. Luckily, Scholastic have said they would love a sequel. And if I'd remained an indie author, I think I also would have written a sequel anyway. So I think it was fate. So I have sprinkled in a few things, little hook points that I can use as a springboard for future stories, but that are not, the world is not relying on them to feel complete.
Okay. Do you think you'd take it past 2 books into a trilogy?
I don't know. At the moment, Scholastic just want the 2. So I'll do the 2, and then it's quite likely I'll work on something else. But I have lots of like little ideas for, honestly, more domestic stories that are not about dealing with some big problem, but they're just sort of little local death loop issues, or everybody going to Pride for fun, or, you know, just kind of relationship stuff between the characters. And I think I will probably continue to write at least those as short stories and novellas, even if it's just for myself and my newsletter subscribers. But again, I can't make any promises. I just have to see how things go.
Fair enough. Well, we'll look forward to the content no matter what. Hopefully we get book 3. That's all the questions. So thank you everyone for listening, and thank you to you, Rosie, for joining us. If you've enjoyed this Q&A, you can find out more about Fantasy Fellowship on our website, fantasyfellowship.co.uk, or follow us on Twitter, where we're at fanfellowship, or Instagram, where we are at fantasy_fellowship. If you want to chat books, TV shows, and all things fantasy, you can join us on our Discord server via links in any of the above. You can find more content on the Fantasy Fellowship YouTube channel, including author Q&As, fandom discussions, monthly Fantasy Fellowship buddy read wrap-ups as well. Rosie, where can people find you online to enjoy much more content?
So I hang out on TikTok a lot as @Merrowchild, which is a wonderful handle because it tells you absolutely nothing about what I do, but I talk about books and I talk about writing. It's the same handle for Twitter and Instagram. I hang out there too. And I have a website, which is www.rosietalbot.co.uk, where you can sign up to my newsletter for some scintillating news from me every month and some freebies as well. I've written a short story called Ghosted, which tells a little bit of a more sort of contemporary story from Mitch's point of view, set a year before 16 Souls. There's character artwork on there, and I'm adding to that every month. So yeah, they're probably the best places.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rosie. It's been lovely. It's been very nice. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for watching this Fantasy Fellowship Halloween special Q&A with me, Rosie Talbot. For the chance to win this, a signed and dedicated copy of my book 16 Souls, head over to the Fantasy Fellowship Instagram page at fantasy_fellowship. Remember to enter before the 5th of November for your submission to be counted. Remember the 5th of November. I must remember to enter this special Halloween giveaway so I can read another day. Good luck! What, you don't dress as a lobster for Halloween? You're missing out.